just recently, my son was going to the same Lawrence Hall Science that he's been to in nursery school / preschool and kindergarten. It's his trip to the Lawrence Hall Science in the first grade. And not only do they need your DMV printout, which I understand for them, you got to be licensed and registration insurance. They required fingerprints to take your kid on a field trip. And they didn't tell parents ahead of time. They told parents about 4 days before this was supposed to happen. And I believe there was a reason why they told them 4 days this is about to happen. So let me bring on Katie, and we can talk about this and some other stuff, because I think this is a great point to kind of launch into. And I'll get her up to speed, and let's see how she's doing, and we can take the last 30 minutes of the show. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Robert. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I've seen better days, but I'm okay. Do you know what I mean? I had toothache and headache and nausea. I haven't been very well, so but not feeling too terrible right now, so it's okay. Right.
Well, you know what? I've heard that an amazing amount of healing takes place during my show.
Oh, excellent. Well, then I'm sure that by the end of this, I'm going to be right as rain.
I think so. Right
yep.
as rain.
Right
that's
as
interesting.
Rain.
I was talking about the Happy Mondays. I don't know if you heard that, but I was talking about the Happy Mondays at the beginning of the show, because you and I have been kind of like dipping into that whole factory record scene, and Tony Wilson and Joy Division and New Order and Tavistock. And
that's right. And we had decided that we were going to one day actually really go dig into it. And we haven't, I don't know if you have, I haven't. But I think that's, especially the New Order thing.
Right.
You know, it would be quite interesting to go and take a look, because that video that you showed me.
Yeah.
The one with the hooded Ku Klux Klan looking people with the black and white hoods and stuff is quite suspicious, right?
It's pretty heavy and weird.
A lot of Nazi symbolism in there and so on. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I mean, I've never been a New Order fan. Mostly, I think, because I'm just a tiny bit too young for it. Do you know what I mean? Not by much, but
right.
You know, my ex, that is 7 years older than me, he was really into all of that. So I know of it through him, right? But I think I was a little too young a teenager at the time to be into that music, right? But yeah. I have found that, you know, at the time we didn't know about certain things, so we were following whatever trend was out there. Even the ones that seemed more counterculture, right? Right,
yeah.
Because I think both you and I, even when we were younger, we were quite counterculture in some ways. But it's kind of sad, isn't it, when you realize that these people that you really liked or that you thought were really cool are actually all New World Order sellouts, right?
For the most part,
even the ones that we thought were cool and trendy and different. So I had that realization. You know, I really used to like the Beatles, and last year it kind of hit me really in the nose that the Beatles were really truly an occult Tavistock project.
Yeah.
And I was not very happy for about a week. You know what I mean? It was like, oh no, not the Beatles as well. Paul McCartney, he's so sweet.
Right.
And then you realize that Paul McCartney probably died, you know, in what in 1966 or something.
With Brian Epstein, yeah.
That's right. So the world is a very strange place.
It is. It completely is. And I've been thinking more about this whole Buddy Holly thing, you know. And I know it sounds really crazy and out there, but I'm putting together pieces a little bit at a time. And when I get a larger chunk of time, I'd like to bolt this whole thing together. But I think that there is a direct correlation with the death of Buddy Holly and the rise of the Beatles. And I don't think there's any coincidence that the Beatles named themselves after Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Okay, because that's where they got the inspiration for the name of their band. And then Buddy Holly dies, and ultimately Buddy Holly's catalog winds up in the hands of, Sir Paul McCartney. And now he controls the Buddy Holly catalog. And if you look at, the death of Ritchie Valens and Buddy Holly and J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, it happens on February 3rd in 1959, which is just before, obviously 1960. 1960, I think, is a very big year in terms of a real shift, a paradigm shift, in terms of technology. It's the first time we put somebody in space, on a public scale, and it's the beginning of the 60s. 1960 is a big year. It's a sea change, and I feel like in a lot of ways 1960 is kind of the birth of the Aquarian Age. And what I'm starting to kind of put together here is because Buddy Holly and J.P. Richardson and Ritchie Valens all died on February 3rd, it is really kind of a ritual, a mega ritual to usher in the Aquarian Age on February 3rd, which then gives birth to the Beatles, which are the band that was going to usher in the Aquarian Age vis-a-vis Tavistock and some of the programming. So I haven't quite put together all the pieces, but there's some timing things that I really want to look at in terms of the formation of the Beatles on the back end of what happens with all these guys and the day the music dies. So that's kind of what I've been working on.
Yeah, and it's a worthwhile. I think it's a worthwhile project. I think that without getting too doom and gloomish about the whole thing, we have been sold this idea that the 60s was a great time of change in which there was a lot of positive stuff that came in consciousness-wise and so on, right? With the whole civil rights movement, right, and various other things. And although that is true on some level, because I don't think that we have a black and white either-or scenario with any of it,
right.
I think that there were some big shifts in consciousness that happened at that time. Even astrologically, if you go and have a look at the 60s, I think the 60s were as interesting as right now, astrologically, right? Because now we have, last year we had the Cardinal Grand Cross and various stelliums and stuff coming in this year.
Eclipses, crazy eclipses, yeah.
Yeah, Pluto in Capricorn, blah, blah, you name it, it's all going on. And at the time, there was the Pluto-Uranus conjunction that I'm very familiar with because I have it in my chart, square my moon, and it kind of, if you have that conjunction very plugged into your personal planets, it pretty much takes over your whole chart.
Yeah.
Very potent, right?
Yeah.
And some people had that in opposition to Saturn and Chiron.
Yeah.
So there was that aspect going on. So there was a truly revolutionary current going on and so on, but there was also the beginning of this engineered takeover of society that we are seeing coming to fruition right now, at least in terms of the plans that are being pushed. And I think that it was probably the beginning of the infiltration of the music industry in quite a serious way. It was the beginning of that infiltration, and also it was the time in which drugs were introduced in a more heavy way into society,
right?
As a disruptive force, although it was under the guise of a liberating thing, mostly marijuana and LSD.
Yeah.
However, we also know that they were experimenting with LSD in Vietnam. Right? Do you remember that movie, Jacob's Ladder?
Well, the drug that they were talking about in Jacob's Ladder was a drug called BZ.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a more psychotic version of LSD. But yeah. Jacob's Ladder is a very powerful movie.
Yeah,
and,
it is. And
it's a very disturbing movie.
Yeah.
It's a hard movie to watch, but there are some scenes in Jacob's Ladder that are mind-boggling. In fact, the one scene that is really mind-boggling is when Tim Robbins is at the party, the house party, and his girlfriend starts dancing with that guy, and that guy turns into a demon. Do you remember that scene?
I have seen it so long ago, I can't remember exactly, but I do remember the whole flavor of that movie. But carry on.
That scene alone, it will. I mean, if you just focus on that scene, and if you have a TiVo or the ability to slow that thing down, that scene will flip your wig, because what happens is that the guy, it's a very hot sort of, kind of disco tune. I forget what the song is, but his girlfriend is really, bumping and grinding, and getting more and more kind of sexual and physical, and he's watching this, and then the guy that she's on the dance floor with becomes this demon, and he winds up literally taking his tail and sodomizing her with his. It's really intense, and that's the scene where he literally passes out and he wakes up in a bathtub filled with ice. I mean, it's James Brown. They're dancing to James Brown. That's what it is.
Right.
So it's very dark, and I think the subtext, quite frankly, the subtext of that scene relates to the music industry.
Yeah. I agree with you. Not necessarily about that scene because I can't remember it, but I'll have to re-look at it. There's a bunch of movies that I'm re-watching now because it's literally, there's more knowledge. So I'm looking at things differently, and I'm remembering things from movies that I've already seen, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, that was not what I thought it was. I have to go re-watch that. I don't know if you've had that experience, right? And recently I watched, I even told you that I watched Devil's Advocate.
Right.
And that movie, watching it now, has a completely different flavor to watching it whenever I watched it several years ago. I think it was 10 years ago or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
There is so much, even in the dialogue of Al Pacino.
Oh, yeah.
There's a moment where he goes off on a tangent once Keanu Reeves has discovered that he's Lucifer.
Right.
And asks him, why are you doing what you're doing kind of thing. And he goes off on this 10, 15-minute piece of dialogue that is extremely well written, by the way, and explains, his whole MO.
It's my century, Kevin.
It's my century, yeah. You have to give it to me. He's like, you have to give it to me. The 21st century is mine.
Mine. Yeah.
And I think we could agree with him.
I remember when I've seen that film about 4 or 5 times, and I remember when I saw that scene the first time, it hit me, but then I saw it the second time from kind of a more awakened perspective. I went, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah. And actually, that film has some fairly spooky moments in it that I didn't even remember. I didn't remember it. It's funny how memory stores things, because in my memory, it was like, oh yeah, whatever, kind of clever movie with Al Pacino pretending to be the devil, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then you rewatch it, and it's like, no, actually, really creepy movie with Al Pacino channeling Lucifer, right? And with ovaries being taken from the woman, and making her all of the stuff that happens to what's her name,
Charlize
Theron.
PTSD stuff, just mind control stuff.
Very disturbing.
Stuff. Yeah.
Like, very disturbing, and she's completely broken by the end of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And And for some reason, that part didn't even register with me when I watched that movie the first